I've never felt power like this before.
I think the reason I wanted to do Apocalypse was because with each X-Men film, I want them to always be different from each other. Where X-Men Days of Future Past dealt with time travel and robots, technology, things like that, this film deals with ancient mutanism, with a mutant who thinks he's a god.
It felt like it was time to tell a story that was not only bigger in its threat to the world, but also a little larger, almost cosmically.
For the first time, it's truly a global threat to all of mankind, mutants and humans alike.
I saw the end of the world.
It's huge. The stakes of this one are the survival of humanity as a species.
That's the scope of Apocalypse's power.
Let's go to war.
It's thousands of years of storytelling, and then there's so many characters. The iconic ones from the first films and their younger versions, and also all the people from First Class and Days of Future Past.
It's nice to see the origins of these characters like Jean Grey and Cyclops.
These films live and die by their fan base, and one does feel obligated, referencing to things that they've seen in the comic book, but also revealing new stuff and breaking certain rules in order to bring surprising elements to the fan base.
This is our 7th or 8th X-Men movie, if you count the Wolverine movies, and so by the 7th or the 8th, you need to do something, I think, that's gonna feel fresh and bigger than what's come before.
This is the culmination of all the films really coming to this point. It's in some ways the X-Men film that people have been waiting for a long time.
One of the things we did with Days of Future Past is we changed the timeline, because in the previous X-Men movies, the world didn't learn about mutants until X-Men 1 in the early 2000s. In Days of Future Past, because of the time travel element, we changed the rules. We changed the reality of 1973 onward.
What's the last thing you remember?
We're kind of moving through time, so I can either take the universe into new places, or we speak about time's immutability, how time kind of wants to go back to where it once belonged. So maybe this is actually a prequel to X-Men 1, 2, and 3. So it's kind of a game that we're playing that never really has been done before.
As everyone knows, the existence of mutants was first discovered during the Paris Peace Accords after the Vietnam War in 1973.
When we come back in '83, we are coming to a world that has long embraced mutants, even to some degree celebrated them and fetishized them.
There are mutants in all facets of life, living integrated lives into the normal human world.
They still hate and fear us. It's just harder to see because they're more polite about it. I got sick of living that life.
And that's why you're not in your natural blue form.
We find Raven is slightly in hiding because she's become too notable a celebrity and is uncomfortable with that.
You're her. It's a hero.
I'm nobody.
Raven has become sort of the Harriet Tubman of mutants. She likes saving mutants one by one and then sending them on their way.
Eric left the last film maybe on the brink of a change, having to really question who and what he was.
He's abandoned his war against humanity, and he's living, I believe, as his parents probably lived.
He's gone into hiding and has been moving around quite a bit for a few years, and eventually settles in Poland and falls in love with a woman, and they get married and they have a child.
That's going to be your assignment for tomorrow. Top marks, everyone. Class dismissed.
Charles, we find him back at the mansion, and we see the school is flourishing.
He's a teacher who takes in waifs and strays and people that the rest of the world doesn't have a place for. And him and Hank together run this school for gifted people. Hank's grown up a lot, I think, in the space of those 10 years. He's kind of in his lab building all his gadgets and gizmos, and I think he's fairly happy, you know. Charles is in good spirits, the school's going very well. I think he enjoys being a teacher and having the kids around, so happy days.
See you all soon.
This might sting a little.
Days of Future Past was such a big step for us, bridging the two casts.
Charles.
Managing both past and future, rewriting in some ways the landscape. Very challenging to think about how are we going to expand the universe further.
It began with what's the challenge, what's the conflict, what's the threat of the film. Very quickly we got to Apocalypse because he is the most powerful mutant that's really ever existed in the X-Men universe.
It felt so different from the other X-Men films, and plus Apocalypse is such a strong and complex character.
It was Louise Simonson who made this character. That was her assignment, to come up with a new super archvillain. And every new writer, every new comic book artist would come in and they'd do their own version of Apocalypse. And so when it came time to make the film with Bryan Singer and with Simon Kinberg, the fact that we were going to get to make our version of it, I thought that was such a fun challenge.
I think lots of people have wanted to see Apocalypse come to life in the X-Men franchise, and it's finally happening.
I'm a huge X-Men fan. I grew up knowing the comics and loving the world and, of course, the movies. So I was really excited that they were bringing in the Apocalypse storyline.
Apocalypse is someone who survived for millennia and various civilizations all over the world, being treated as a god and imagining himself as not a god, but God.
Why?
Elohim, Shem, Ra. I've been called many names over many lifetimes. Civilizations rise with his help, and when they're going in the wrong direction, as he says, he clears the forest for new growth.
The film begins in ancient Egypt, where Apocalypse is about to transfer his consciousness, his being, into a younger mutant who has the ability to heal, like Wolverine, like Sabretooth, Lady Deathstrike, like other mutants. This will enable him to live forever.
One of the things that's so interesting about Apocalypse is, unlike Magneto, it's not a man versus mutant struggle for him. It is a weak versus strong.
His only care is who survives, who's the strongest, and who devotes themselves to him.
Apocalypse just represents a good old-fashioned, I want to kill everyone. Why? Because I got it. I want to rule the world. Why? Because it just feels good.
Choose! Show yourself!
When we started thinking about the Apocalypse story, there was truly only one actor that we ever wanted for the part, and it was Oscar Isaac.
Oscar has the challenge of playing what is kind of a larger-than-life character, but because of his skills, he does it with such authenticity and such dramatic integrity that he's really the anchor of the movie.
I was a huge X-Men and X-Factor fan since I was little. I would collect the comic books, and for me it was just very exciting because as a fan of not only of Apocalypse but of the comic book, in a way I felt like I was the inside man. I was going to be there to try to make sure that we steered him in a way for the kid in me that used to collect the comic book. What would I want to see?
I'm just such a fan of his work. It just gets better and better, and he's just really smart and very sophisticated in his approach to the work.
It's so funny working with Oscar because he's the nicest, funniest man, and then they call action, and he's evil, and he's crazy, and he's doing these really insane things, and then they call cut.
Touch me.
And he's back to Oscar.
He's one of the best actors out there, I think. Some of his speeches as Apocalypse are just fantastic.
You can fire your arrows from the Tower of Babel, but you can never strike God!
To be out there in that heat every day under all that makeup and under all that gear, and then trying to act and emote and be compelling and convincing and commanding is really challenging, but he's superb.
Oscar's costume was incredibly difficult to build. First, we start with these very detailed costume sketches. Then all the fabrics he wore were created and made specially for him.
It had 13 moving pieces to it. There was these layers upon layers to give it a very complex look. It was 3D printed, there was gauntlets, there was gloves, there was leggings, there was wild boots, chest piece.
We wanted him to feel larger than other people in the movie physically. We wanted him to have that sort of ancient, mythic, godlike look to him. And all of that's a little more sci-fi and radical than we've done in the movies to date.
And action.
One of the challenges that the fabrication department at Legacy FX had to do was create this fantastic looking armor that looks heavy, looks metal, looks rugged, but make it quick to put on, fast to take off, as cool as possible, all the stuff that you need to consider that there's a human in this costume.
It was also a very uncomfortable suit. Oscar constantly was very hot, so he had cold water piped in through tubes. Whenever we were done shooting a sequence, we would have someone with a tank full of cold water that we would plug him into.
I basically had a pit crew, and they would just come in and try to take it off in between takes, and they got so fast with it.
Good morning, how's it going, buddy? Good to see you.
The makeup that they have him in is unbelievable. It is awesome and scary, and he looks terrifying and really powerful, and it's easy to work with, you know? You're definitely freaked out when Oscar's there on set.
For the look of Apocalypse, I obviously first addressed the comic book, and then tried to create a sense of makeup that could bring out Oscar Isaac's performance.
It's a 6-piece prosthetic with overlapping skull caps and headpieces and face pieces, so it's intensive.
The prosthetics for Apocalypse are all silicone face pieces, so you can keep them very thin. They're very supple, so they move with him and transfer the subtle detail of any of his movements so that he can act through it as well.
The makeup was an incredible job. By the end of it, we got down to about an hour it took for them to put that makeup on and take it off, which at first it started at 4 hours.
The color of the skin was really fascinating because what we discovered in makeup is that depending on what light you put on the makeup, it completely changed the color of the character. So I think it brings a complexity, interest to the character. And I don't think it betrays the comic.
With these films, you have to kind of heighten the stakes each time and have bigger, better, badder villains, and I think he is that.